That would be the sound of a giant tape recorder, recording the trajectory of a rocket. One exciting moment in the sea of nothingness that had been happening for the rest of the day. This was the hardship tour of one Charles H. Brown. Mr. Brown never saw a battlefield, nor had he ever had to shoot a man. No, Mr. Brown, like many other men, was supporting men on the front lines. Though Mr. Brown saw every day the same, his service was still invaluable. Charles H. Brown was born in Reading, Pennsylvania, to his parents Charles and Florence. He had 2 brothers and a sister. Before he entered the service, he had a summer job at the local knitting mill. He enlisted into the Army at the age of 18, and when asked about his choice, he said,
"The recruiter told me about all these good things that I might learn and that might be good for my future, what jobs I could do, and it was either enlist for 3 or go in this unit and enlist for 4. He also said that this unit, the educational benefits of it were better, so I decided to enlist in."
Mr. Brown would later go on to describe basic training as,
Basic training was somebody banging on your footlocker at about 4 o'clock in the morning, getting you up to get moving. And then the first thing you did usually was did your morning run.
Besides the early mornings, Mr. Brown also remembers throwing a live grenade and rifle training. He would learn the ropes at Fort Dix, New Jersey before moving on for his MOS at Fort Devens. Fort Devens sits just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and it would be Mr. Brown's home for 6 months. This time would also include the winter season and would give rise to some of his most vivid memories. He would have to march with the rest of his battalion to their classrooms about half a mile from the barracks, during the winter, in the snow. While this problem was solved simply by giving each man a pair of galoshes, this would also give rise to another problem, a lack of the right size of galoshes. Mr. Brown remembers having to hide his galoshes, since once you took off your galoshes for class, if you did not hide them, you were at the mercy of getting galoshes that did not fit properly. He also recalls that the hardest part of training was,
Hardest part of the training would be trying to get out of shoveling snow.
After his time at Fort Devens, Mr. Brown was sent down to Fort Meade, where they were building a new kind of listening center at the time. He and 7 others were tentatively assigned to this new center and were stationed at Fort Meade for the time. During his time at Fort Meade, Mr. Brown got to visit the Space Center at Cape Canaveral and got a private tour of it with the others. Once his brief stint at Fort Meade was over, Mr. Brown would be sent to Tuskegee, Turkey. Tuskegee stood for Turkey, United States Logistics, and the base would be Mr. Brown's home for about a year. Tuskegee was considered a hardship tour and was nicknamed Diogenes Station, as the base sat over Diogenes' birthplace, Sinop, Turkey. Sinop is a small town, and Mr. Brown remembers that the people
there put up with you. They didn't particularly care for you because they're Muslims and we were Christians.
Tuskegee sat across the Black Sea from Russia, and Mr. Brown remembers that he even got the chance to swim in the Black Sea. The base consisted of a small PX, enlisted man's club, officers club, movie theater, bowling alley, and a church, besides the actual operations center and living quarters. Mr. Brown dealt with non-communication signals, which included things like telemetry from rockets, and he recalled that
you never knew when something was going to come up. So you had to constantly monitor. And then when we monitored, we'd have to tape it.
this would entail having signals pop up once or twice a shift or not having anything for days, so most of the time in Turkey was rather boring. However, that does not mean nothing happened. For one, Mr. Brown never had to clean his own room since everything was taken care of by Turkish nationals. Though Mr. Brown had his room cleaned for free, the houseboys smoked Turkish cigarettes called boffers, and Mr. Brown described,
"Oh my God, they smelled terrible. The place stank after they were in cleaning it."
room cleaning wasn't the only thing that was done for free. Mr. Brown never had to wash his clothes either, as this was also done by the Turks. Again, there was a price to pay, and it came in the form of buckets of starch. His uniform would be so stiff that you had to spend plenty of time trying to even get into it. Though his time in Turkey was short-lived, it was rather entertaining. After his hardship tour was over, Mr. Brown was sent to Fort Hood, Texas. This would be where he would spend the rest of his enlistment, and this would be rather boring for the young Mr. Brown. Basically the same. Wake up, go to the motor pool, check his car, and head back. For about a year and a quarter. Mr. Brown's enlistment ended on the 19th of August, 1968. He met this day like any other, and remembers it was slightly sad.
But it was just another day.
Okay.
It was the day I lost my free meal and my room and board.
Sad. Though many soldiers would have gone straight home on their last day, Mr. Brown chose to go on a little sightseeing. He went north from Fort Hood, Texas towards Dallas, Texas, and saw the Painted Desert, petrified forest, and even spent a night at the Grand Canyon on his trip home. Once he finally got home, his family met him as if they were coming home from school. Mr. Brown described it as,
No big deal.
he would spend the next month or few collecting unemployment before he grew bored of it and headed back to work. He worked at a factory in Reading, PA before schooling grabbed his attention once again. Many of the men in his unit had been talking about it, so Mr. Brown decided to take his SATs. Keep in mind, Mr. Brown was in his 20s at the time and was taking the test alongside 16 to 18-year-olds. This divide also extended to people his own age. Mr. Brown's wartime service shaped his view of the world for years after he left. For one, Mr. Brown remembers seeing people his own age as kids.
I felt so much older and so much more mature because I've seen so much and done so much.
Okay.
And a lot of those people, they never left Berks County or Pennsylvania.
So there's
Mr. Brown wishes for many people to realize that war is
And I have learned that it's not the way you see it a lot of times in movies. It's a lot of boring stuff going on because a lot of times you're not doing much of anything.
War is brutal, and Mr. Brown pities those who come back scarred from the horrors of war. In the end, only 1 out of every 10 soldiers actually sees the front lines, so for the 9 that did not, they were stuck in a support role like Mr. Brown. War can be just as boring as it is horrific. Though movies love to show the flashy and heroic men fighting on the front lines, keep in mind that behind that man stands equally needed and heroic men. Men like Charlie Brown. Thank you for your service, Mr. Brown.